Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Operations Center of Excellence webinar, Road Weather Spotlight Series, Advancements in Flood Management and Maintenance and Operations, Part 1. This is the first of a two-part webinar series as a part of the Road Weather Management series, the second part of which will be taking place in May. My name is Matt Jasnews, and I will help facilitate today's webinar. As a quick reminder, at the National Operations Center of Excellence, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. You can go to NOCoE's website at transportationops.org to browse through links for TSMO resources and news. Previous webinar recordings can also be found there, as well as case studies can be accessed from the NOCoE resources pages as well. Now, I'd like to cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on NOCoE's website. All the attendees are encouraged to stay engaged by using the Q&A feature for questions and chat feature for comments. These are both on the bottom of your screen or on the top of your screen, depending on your Zoom program's orientation. We have a question and answer session at the end of the presentations, so if you have any questions, we encourage you to enter them in the Q&A area as they come to mind at any time. Also, please feel free to enter your name and agency in the chat to say hello to your peers. Now, I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, who is representing the Federal Highway Administration, Office of Operations, Jeremy McGuffey. Jeremy?
Thanks, Matt, and I appreciate your help as well as NOCoE's on making these happen. So as Matt mentioned, we're doing another one of our Road Weather Spotlight editions. This topic is going to be Advancement in Flood Management for Maintenance and Operations Part 1 of a two-part series. As Matt said, I'm Jeremy McGuffey with the Federal Highway Administration Office of Operations. And just real quick, whether you're new or whether you've been here for a while, the Road Weather Management Program is responsible for mitigating the impact of severe weather across the surface transportation network, ultimately improving safety and mobility. We do this through stakeholder engagement and outreach, road weather management, research and development, technology transfer, and deployment support, as well as training. Next slide. So before we get started, I just have some disclaimers that we put on all of our presentations. Essentially, this is telling you that this presentation was created and is being co-presented by both the Federal Highway Administration and an outside entity. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of FHWA or the USDOT. The contents do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the USDOT. The U.S. government does not endorse products or manufacturers. Trademarks or manufacturers' names appear in this presentation only because they are considered essential to the objective of the presentation. They are included for informational purposes only and are not intended to reflect a preference, approval, or endorsement of any one product or entity. Except for the statutes and regulations cited, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the states or the public in any way. The presentation is intended only to provide information regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Next slide. So today's agenda, real quick: advancements in flood management for maintenance and operations. Our first speaker will be Chris Lochra, flood warning engineer with the city of Fort Collins stormwater utility in Fort Collins, Colorado. Then we'll have Ranjan Muttiah, senior professional engineer, stormwater division of transportation and public works with Fort Worth, Texas. And lastly, we'll have James Halgren, cyber infrastructure researcher with the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology, or CIROH. With that said, we'll move on to our first presenter. If you want to cue up the slides. So Chris Lochra is a flood warning engineer at the city of Fort Collins stormwater utility. He has educational and work background in geology, hydrology, and watershed planning. His postgraduate vocations began in environmental remediation prior to his current position, including directing emergency response efforts during flood events. Chris, welcome in, and I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, representing the city Fort Collins stormwater utility, a defined utility within our larger utility group, which is water, wastewater, stormwater, electric, and then broadband now. Fort Collins is a city of 150,000 or so residents with another 35,000 enrollment at Colorado State University here. We're located in the northern part of Colorado along the Front Range. You can see the Continental Divide, higher Rockies in the distance. Flanking and looking, you're looking west, north and south is Horsetooth Reservoir, lies between along the western boundary of the city, and right at the base of the foothills there. Next slide. I want to draw your attention in this graphic to the sub-basins we've defined for regulatory purposes. These are the individual basins that we regulate to. This is the 100-year floodplain you see displayed. Particular interest to the green polygon in the middle, which is our Old Town Basin. And that is the earliest development. It has the core of our commerce and visitor and retail businesses in town. And the CSU campus is located along the southern part of that. And then south of that is the Spring Creek Basin, which is heavily residential. Old Town had most of its natural drainage obliterated during its history of development. So we experienced quite a bit of flooding from that lack of natural drainages. Spring Creek suffered our greatest flood, sort of modern record as far as life safety and damage is concerned. Next slide. Just as some example photos here from sort of recent history. Old Town, which is a picture top left there, very common event for decades prior to some recent outfall construction and a $35 million infrastructure project for the collection system west of this or upstream of this area. Commonly flooded. Every rainstorm pretty much dropped something that was collect in Old Town, and this was the era of sandbagging and dam barriers for basements and lower level structures. Then we're subject to lots of other types of events. We have, as we enter the spring here, potential for rain on snow, which can trigger quick flooding very quickly for us. And then we occasionally have events during the summer. We had an intense rain and hail combined event that the hail component shredded vegetation so severely it blocked our collection system. Those are actually piles of hail you see in the bottom left-hand corner there. So we occasionally have these sort of unique storms. Our design storm is a 2-hour event, sort of front-loaded, 3.67 inches for our master planning efforts. Next slide. And then our significant flood, modern flood, was the 1997 Spring Creek flood. This was a year's worth of precipitation falling in about 31 hours from a cell that stacked up on the flank of Horsetooth Reservoir right at the top of the Spring Creek watershed. This resulted sadly in 5 deaths, ultimately $200 million of damage. And we had no alert system or warning system at that time. The National Weather Service radar underpredicted that storm, the depths, by about half, though they were very accurate for other cells that developed in this overall vent up and down the Front Range. Droplet size and some other factors confounded their estimates. So it was determined we had to get some real-time measurement in. And in 1999, we started our effort with to grow an alert system. Next slide, please. So in 2013, we had a major riverine flood, and this followed 20 fires in 2012, where a good portion of the lower mountain watershed burned. And then we had terrific amounts of debris in our channels all through 2012 and into early 2013. And then an unusual set of circumstances, or meteorological circumstances, resulted in lots of flooding from basically Boulder and actually Golden, south of Boulder, northwest of Denver, all the way up the Front Range, with the smaller communities in the foothills devastated by this. And these were road closures, damage to structures. We had to do realignment of Highway 34 in the Big Thompson Canyon. So this was a major flood that in Fort Collins, we actually prepared for this. We had an exercise in the spring because of the concerns about debris and the augmentation of flood flows. So we exercised this with a multi-agency effort in our kind of performing arts center gathered here downtown that I prepared, and I think it served us pretty well for the awareness component for this storm that happened in September. Next slide. Then in 2012, we had very significant fires in our mountain watersheds. Pictured here is the footprint for the Cameron Peak fire extending from on the left, the Continental Divide, all the way to the Front Range here. Superimposed on that is the 2012 fires of Hewlett Gulch and High Park that you see in darker shade. So this watershed, about 70% of our mountain watershed now is in fire recovery situation. And with that, I might add, these troublesome fire, not pictured here, flanked this fire to the south, extended over and threatened Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park. Combined 400,000 acres burned is the largest wildland fires recorded in Colorado history. Next slide. Those fires drove, significant changes to the behavior of the mountain watersheds, and worked with the National Weather Service to raise the sensitivity of the triggers for any advisories, watches, warnings for flash flooding in the mountainous areas, the development in the mountainous part of the watershed, all the way up to just 1/3 of an inch in 15 minutes and 1/2 inch in 30 minutes. And from the burn area assessment reports that came out after those fires, we saw 10 to 30-fold increases depending on the size of the sub-watershed in the peak flow expected as runoff, and it doubled for a 100-year event for the overall watershed. So that would mean instead of about 13,000 CFS, we expect in the low 20s for a major event over the burn scar. And sadly, the flood after fire situation was, well, it occurred in that a family was swept from their cabin into the river, and this is in 2021 is this headline. This is from the Washington Post even. 2022, there was another couple of deaths in a smaller watershed from recreationalists and staying in a developed area, actually, just because of the immediate response of the watershed to any inputs. Next slide. So how do we measure these things? Well, as you'll hear from other speakers and through the series, but certainly today, we have an alert system that was started in 1999, and it's typically located, we have rain and stage measurements on all of our drainage features, including detention ponds. We have a number of irrigation ditches we have to monitor that can translate water from one subbasin to the next. We also have some automated functions. You see top center there is the Halgren well ditch, which is about 1,000 cubic feet per second irrigation ditch to carry divert water from the Poudre out to parts east, north of Greeley, large irrigation reservoirs for the historical livelihood of the agricultural basin we're in. And we can trigger the closure and convert that from irrigation flow to flood flow in an automated fashion with remote trigger points or gauges that we have that send a coded message to change the operation here at this. And we also had extended the early warning part of the early warning system approach or philosophy I put in some gauges into the mountain watershed that the county now, after the fires, has extended much farther up all the way to Cameron Pass. But that meant putting in some repeaters because we still have essentially basically a radio telemetry for most of our system, a couple of major repeaters, and then about probably over 100 gauges now between the county and the city. Next slide. So how do we prepare for our storms? Talking mostly today about our process. We rely heavily on the National Weather Service. We have an intimate relationship with them. This is a picture of a little tour we did to the Boulder Forecast Office. They also, we can call them obviously during events. They receive our alert data, so they can truth their radar against the measurements from our alert system. They've scheduled Monday morning briefings after the fires, immediately after the fires. They were weekly through the summer for advance notice to our emergency managers about conditions from the burn scars. Since we have emergency managers from Estes Park and the various counties, including Larimer County and Boulder County and Grand County as well, Jackson to the west even. So this is a very good service they offer us. We also look at the Colorado Division of Water Resources offers the flood threat bulletin. That's some probabilistic modeling we can look at for expected precipitation totals, sub-kilometer kind of resolution. That's very helpful for us. That's published in the morning, beginning May 1st, and then updated in the afternoon, early afternoon, which is important for us because a lot of our storms develop in the afternoon. Next slide. Then we can stand up, as this is a shot from 2013, stand up a physical incident command post or EOC. We have permanent ones, and we now have one located downtown. under our city manager's office, we moved our emergency management representation out of Poudre Fire and into a civilian arrangement department with the city. But we'll stand up a physical DOC if given enough time and severity of an event and duration, obviously a big issue. But we work virtually prior to sort of co-locating physically. And I'll talk a little bit about our flow process. Next slide. The software we use is Contrail. That's the data management software we're using, and we have some dashboards set up for displaying severity of alarms for various sensor types. And then we can overlay some weather radar imagery, some reflectivities over that to kind of corroborate storm behavior with totals for stage or rain totals. And then we rely on some other software that we look at for more up-to-date sweeps. We use the weather called Weather Sentry for a pretty up-to-date, no more delay than 5-minute radar sweep of development through town here. And we use Weather Message to kind of capture those National Weather Service bulletins and messages and to distribute those to our emergency responders. Next slide. So this is a flow chart of our sort of ICS structure. This is the way we respond. The Stormwater Incident Command is actually the on-call person. I would take a week myself, or essentially I'm always there for anyone, but we have a staff of 12, 24/7 through our flood season, which is April through September. And that person is the point person for receiving any kind of messaging from the system. And then they will work directly with waterfield operations crews here in utilities and deploy them as needed based on action items from our emergency action plan. And then we can expand that process, expand that arrangement, that structure, of course, as the severity grows or duration lengthens as needed, and that we can pull in leadership and pull in management to actually manage as we break into, say, multiple crews and deploy more resources to the field, and then delegate more of the expectations and requirements of the on-call person or the incident commander initially as the storm develops. And then I've got a picture of sort of a fully fleshed out ICS chart. We've all seen these. And in this case, the stormwater group that we're in, the on-call group, will be moved into a field operations or the operations section for a larger event, with also a footprint over in the planning section for development of an incident action plan. So this is kind of a dynamic, flexible approach that we use. Next slide. Got a picture here of our on-call handbook. This is our 3-ring binder version. We also have it electronically, but this has all of the information, prepared information with all the expected action items for each sensor at any location where we have specific things required, action items required for mitigating the flood conditions there. And this includes access to, we have 44 high hazard dams in the area. We have an emergency action plan links to those. We also have a couple of levees in town. We have to maintain, monitor, one protecting an older section of town, low-lying part of town, another protecting our waste reclamation facility. And this book contains essentially all the information, reference information for flow in the river, timing. We have bridge infrastructure information there, and we have access to prescribed polygons that we've established for notification should we need to push something out for flood polygons in various areas that are subject to flooding. Next slide. Can't stress them enough. We're all aware of the importance of our relationships with other agencies. You know, we work closely with the other department streets, our parks. They all have their own call teams. They have rangers and they have on-call streets. So we'll work laterally with those groups for any kind of response operations. We have our Customer Connections group. The city PIO office is our outreach group, and we have prescribed sort of prepared messaging that we can augment with selective bullet items depending on the type of event, so we can rapidly get information pushed out through the PIO to the public on their outlets, or in the case of a particularly large event or significantly concerning life safety event, use the Larimer Emergency Telephone Authority, who has the reverse 911. They can push notify with their Everbridge software current information on flooding and recommendations for action. We also deal closely with Larimer County Emergency Management, a very professional group. Lori Hodges is the emergency manager there, and we have to oftentimes work because of the flood threat regionally. And Colorado State University also has its own staff, and they track, their student body and have the contact information, and they can push warnings as well in our community. Next slide. As far as notifications go, we don't do any real-time flood inundation modeling here. We have static maps, prepared polygons of areas of known concern for flooding. And here's an example where we have floor elevations as well as flood elevations for different stages of the Poudre. And to the top right there is an example of, that's our web page. That's the public-facing graphic for our flood warning system. And that has polygons that will automatically populate or show, given significant flooding, that shows both Spring Creek and the Poudre River being activated. This is just for a test shot, so to speak, for I think this is for our CRS documentation. This wasn't a real event, but and then the crafting of messaging. Like I said, we have most of these things sort of pre-prepared. They'll be looked at and breathed upon, depending on the event. We're trying to basically reduce the response time, get things out as quickly as possible. Next slide. And then post-event, those are sort of the processes during event for communications, response and communications. But post-event, we always concern ourselves. I don't see the text here, but the documentation effort post-event, that's getting damage teams out, assessing damage. This is a levee that had a erosional break there in the bottom right. We'll have infrastructure damage. We'll have to investigate areas where we have projects, ongoing projects. I think this might be along one of the water courses or maybe the edge of the Poudre River. Then we have graphics, of course, we capture the radar reflectivity, radar imagery, and our rain totals, and any information we used we can compile after the event for after action review, and then summarize that as a freestanding document. Or sometimes if it's just small events, I'll summarize them in an annual report that I'll publish for the water year, and include in that how our system performed and poor documentation on the data itself and some analysis, and then also sort of how our on-call team performed and how our response went for these events. So that's the core of our deliverable to the as far as a process for the city, as far as what we offer in our flood warning and flood management program here. Any questions? Next slide. Questions, I think maybe we'll hold. Actually took the slide out. We'll hold those till after all the talks. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Chris. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, you can enter those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen in real time and get those answered. We will have 10 minutes set aside at the end of the presentations today to do some Q&A or follow up if there's additional questions. Appreciate your presentation, Chris. My inner emergency manager was looking at some of your documentation that you had there and how you were able to pull that from the NIMS modeling and the ICS modeling and adapt it to flood management. I appreciate that. Good job. Our next presenter is going to be Ranjan Muttiah with the City of Fort Worth. Ranjan has been a senior professional engineer with the Stormwater Division of Transportation and Public Works at the City of Fort Worth since 2011. Ranjan has responsibilities for the city's flood warning system and stormwater quality. Ranjan, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for having me over. Hopefully my voice is carrying over to you all from Fort Worth. Yes? Okay.
Sounds good.
I will. Yep, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the City of Fort Worth's real-time flood warning system. Appreciate actually talking to you all in transportation, because as you will see, we've had fatalities mainly on roads. So it's great to have a dialogue with you all and talk to you all. So, okay, next slide. I would just want to make a disclaimer about my presentation. If you want to just go back one slide, and I can pick up back. Okay, yeah. So let's pick up over here, same as kind of what Jeremy mentioned. If you can go to the next slide. So just a little blurb on the city of Fort Worth. We are the 12th largest city as of like 2023. We are growing rapidly, and the expectation will actually become the 10th largest city by end of 2025. So we got a good amount of growth. With growth comes more people on the streets. With more people on the streets during a flood event, more people put themselves in flood danger. And so as a result, we also have to grow our flood warning network with the growth past as well as future expected growth. One of the visions we have is to make Fort Worth a safe community. So the flood safety is also an important part of safety in the city. Next slide. So I just wanted to show you kind of the river network. We do have an extensive river network. Our main river here is the Trinity River. So on the west side, we got the West Fork Trinity River, the Clear Fork Trinity River that joins near downtown and then heads towards Dallas, and that's called the East Fork Trinity River. And in blue, in the blue, you see the city creeks, and then in light brown, you see the even smaller rivers, which also are subject to flooding. And so you can see there's a good dense network of rivers. And whenever there's a significant amount of rainfall, there is potential for flooding citywide. So in the 1940s, the Trinity River had major flooding, and then there was levees built. So as a result, you got sumps built behind the levee network that can back up the flows from the creek system. Next slide. So our stormwater utility, which funds my position, was formed as a result of severe flooding in 2004. This was a citizen-led initiative. There was chronic flooding. And then the utility was formed in 2006. The utility is funded by the impervious cover. And we function in 4 main functional areas. We maintain our drainage network, so to prevent clogging and backup. We mitigate flooding hazards through capital improvement projects. So these are expensive projects. And then we also warn the residents through the real-time flood warning network I'm going to talk about, as well as through the floodplain management efforts to prevent people from building in flood-prone areas, and then to prevent people from getting themselves in harm. We also review development so that they don't put themselves or the structures anyway in the floodplain. So you can kind of see some of those pictures at the bottom. Maintenance through the crane at the bottom left. You can see a detention pond in the middle, the flasher network, and you see a flasher, roadside flasher on the right, and then our development criteria manual on the upper right side. Next. So a short history. We've had since about late 90s, we've had about 20 fatalities. Nearly all of them have been road fatalities related to floods. And so in 2000 to 2002, we had 3 fatalities that led to 3 test locations. Those were funded by the city funds. Then 2004, we had additional, the one that I referred to earlier, we had more fatalities. We installed a flash network through city bonds. And then we located these sites based on prioritizing all the hazardous locations. We prioritize up to 285 from 1,500 locations. And then we actually obtained LAPAFA through the Federal Highway Administration, administrated by TxDOT. We added 38 sites. And then in 2018, we upgraded our network from Alert to Alert 2, and also installed dedicated weather stations to have a better understanding of rainfall and intense weather. And these stations were spread throughout the city. And then currently, we are installing additional flood warning sites through our own funding. And we are looking at incremental improvements through what we call the road overtop mitigation, HROM effort. So this HROM effort is a way to improve the safety level at as many of these locations as possible by spreading our funding through, making improvements at these flood-prone low water crossings. Next. So here's a listing of the way we went about prioritizing. So we used objective flood criteria, depth, frequency of overtopping, what was the traffic volumes. We looked at past incidents, fatalities, obviously moved the ranking higher, the amount of rescues at a site, resident complaints of flooding. And then we also used how drivers would react as they kind of approach these low water crossings, and incorporated that on a grading scheme. So we used all those grading schemes and ranked the roughly 1,500 sites, and then got to the top 285, and then went down that list and looked at locations where we could install these flood warning systems. Next. So around 2018, we kind of did a reset and kind of looked at our flood warning network and looked at how we could improve it. One of the improvements that we made was to upgrade from Alert to Alert 2. I'll briefly mention that later on. And then also looked at, what do we really need in terms of getting an early lead? And one of the things that we identified is we really need a good rainfall observation network, so we can kind of capture that rainfall intensity as it's occurring, and then also use that rainfall perhaps to nowcast into the future, so we can understand what the flooding would be based off of the rainfall intensity as it's coming in, and then also use that rainfall to bias correct radar products. So that was one of the things that we identified as being one of the missing points in 2018. So we reset it, developed a master plan, and one of the three of the things that we identified was we wanted the system to be reliable, resilient, and then relevant in terms of getting the information out there to the residents, to the driving public, as much as possible. And we still got a long way to go on that relevancy part, and we are working hard at it. And I'll provide some information about how we're trying to get the information out to the driving public. Next. So here's a overall design of the flood warning network. Again, a lot of this was done in 2018. So we upgraded to Alert 2. Whereas earlier we had one receive site on the left, we upgraded to a secondary receive site, so that in case the primary receive site went down, we always had the backup, the secondary receive site. The data was ingested into the cloud server, and then we also have a local server that communicates in the background with the cloud server. On the lower part of the slide, you see what it's like on the ground. We have a master that collects all the local data, the rainfall, the water level as is rising and lowering with the flood. And that information then is collected by the master and then broadcast out through very high frequency radio, the hydro frequency to the received sites. Locally, we use spread spectrum to communicate between the master and the flashers to trigger. We also wanted flexibility so that the remote could also act as a gauging station. So we could instrument the remote to collect rainfall as well as collect maybe localized ditch flooding, and then send that information to the master. Then the master broadcasts out. So if there's a flood, the master is responsible for letting the remotes know, hey, turn your flashers on, the road's overtopped, and then the flashes would come on, and then they would communicate back and forth as the flood recedes, so that the flashes can also turn off. Next slide. Another cartoon of what that looks like. So pretty much repeating what I mentioned. You can see on the left one of these instrumented sites. The conduit goes all the way as much as possible to the flow line of the creek. That was one of the things that we noticed that had to be remedied from the earlier effort. Kind of try to get that water level rising from the flow line of the creek as much as possible. It doesn't always work. You might not be able to access the flow line necessarily, but that's one of the big things. Try to get that measurement continuously as that flood level is rising, so you have early lead up. Okay, next. Here's kind of a depiction of all the different sites. Not going to get into the detail, but you can see, you know, on the right side, upper right side, the dedicated weather stations. One of the challenges in an urban environment, as you can imagine, is trying to find open space so that, you know, you don't have obstruction and you have a clean you know, weather measurement of parameters. Sometimes, you know, we got to go to the extreme because of theft and vandalism and put fencing around our equipment, because there's temptation to, you know, cut wires and steal solar panels. So that's something we've had to deal with. Sometimes it happens a little bit more often than we'd like to. And then on the left side, you can see this one over here. If my mouse shows, you can see one of the tipping buckets installed alongside one of the remotes that I was talking to you about, so that the remotes can be instrumented as well. Next slide. So if you open the cabinet box, again, I won't get into the detail, but there is essentially a data logger in there that collects the data. The data logger communicates to the telemetry unit, and then the telemetry unit communicates to the radio, and then the radio broadcasts out through VHF. And then the data logger also has inbuilt spread spectrum, so it can communicate to the local remotes. Everything is solar powered, so self-contained, and we back it up with battery powered, 35 amp hour battery power, and the batteries are continually monitored through telemetry. One of the things that you see there is a conditioning box. The conditioning box, it just collects, kind of transitions the signal coming out of the pressure transducer and transmits it over to the data logger. The next slide, you'll see the next slide. Okay, so next slide is the receive site. This is the alert 2 telemetry. Again, I'm not going to get into too much of it, but it's a significant improvement from the alert protocol. Chris was referring to alert earlier. So alert was whenever there was data collected by the site, it would broadcast it out, whereas alert 2 uses a TDMA telemetry. So each site is given its slot, and then that that site communicates within that slot period. We have a 1 minute frame length that's at 60,000 millisecond, and each of the slots is 250 milliseconds. So each site has to collect all the data and transmit within that window whenever there's an event that then is broadcast to the primary and the secondary receive site. The slide you see there is some of the signal conditioning through cavity resonators that clean up that frequency and then send it out through IP protocol. Next. To the cloud server. Here's detailed code and very detailed stuff, essentially consisting of the telemetry unit on the left side, the data logger unit on the right side, and then the data logger unit uses the ports to collect all the data from the sensors that are sending in. There's a lot of performance checking going on in terms of whether any of the sensors are out of compliance, or if there's any issue related to the battery going out of compliance, and there's a flag sent out. So there's a lot of intelligence built into this, and that's one of the benefits of programming, having a programmable data logger. So you can work with the designers and the engineers to customize something that is specific to your needs. Next slide. So this is the same thing. The earlier one was for the master. This is what is in the remotes, a simplified system. But even the remotes, as I mentioned, on the right side, you can have data coming in from sensors, then that collects it, and then the communication is through spread spectrum radio frequencies to the master. Next. So just kind of a menu of the different sensors we have. We have pressure transducers, radars, float switches, rain gauges. We've got distrometers. We measure weather with dedicated multi-parameter weather sensors. And then we also have one site where we have a flood gate that deploys whenever there's a flood. So we have tilt sensors on those. Those have hydraulic tilt sensors as well as MEM tilt sensors on them. Next. So here's a depiction of the multi-parameter. This is actually a Weissela unit. We measure rainfall through the distrometer. All that is a steel plate that measures the sound made by raindrops or hail. And there's an acoustic signal processing unit underneath that listens to that sound and then translate that into rainfall. And then this multi-parameter sensor also has all the other sensors that you would typically expect from a weather station. Next. Here's what, if a pressure transducer looks like inside, nothing mysterious. This is a contact sensor. It depends on how much that inner membrane plate kind of deflects. And then there are strain gauges that measure that deflection. And whenever you have pressure buildup, that deflection gets more and more, and that signal then varies with that deflection. We use a Keller unit. And these have, again, got to be maintained regularly. I won't talk about maintenance, but all of these systems have to be maintained. Okay, next one. We also use a radar unit. These are particularly useful on bridge decks. And when you have, a lot of freeboard from the bridge deck down to the water level. These are great for that. One of the drawbacks is that you need water. It doesn't work too well on dry land. So you need to have the continuous water buildup as the flood is taking place. Next. I think all of you all have seen tipping buckets. So that's another way we measure rainfall. The distrometers are co-located with these tipping buckets. So that's a nice way of checking one against the other. We use the distrometer also as a way of QA/QCing the rainfall. Next. We also, not everywhere, we also use these intelligent devices. This is a Campbell scientific device to monitor the power budget. Very important, especially since we are solar power dependent, to make sure that the power budget is adequate. And you can see in some cases it is the top graph, in some cases it's not in the bottom graph. And so we kind of have to figure out, do we need larger solar panels? Maybe there's tree obstructions and things like that. And all of this is telemetered in real time. Next. So as Chris mentioned, we also use Contrail as our server software. All this information is made available to the public. And then on the right side, you see what it looks like during a severe storm. For the people to see, this is stuff that comes in real time. It'll say avoid if there's a overtop, or caution if the water level is rising, and if there's nothing going on, then it'll just say none. So this is a way for us to get information out to the public. Next. So want to talk to you all a little bit about what happens during a storm event. Lots of complex things go on. So I try to depict that through kind of a cascade diagram. So we do get the National Weather Service notifications prior to the event. Our field crews do routes to check whether any of the culverts are blocked, and if there's blockage, they'll remove it. And then, we also make, if there's a severe event, we also make sandbags available for residents to pick up and barricade around their structures. And then during the event, at least from the flood warning side, there's really not much we do other than just if there is any down sensors. We also have cameras at some of these locations. So we kind of dynamically monitor the situation. If a sensor goes down, we communicate to our field operations to use the camera system in case of need. And then post-event, we run the rainfall report, see what happened, follow up with any of the sensors that may have been down. For example, the recent freeze, we had a recent freeze. Some of those sensors were misfiring. You saw the diaphragm in that PT sensor. If there's freeze, and as you know, water, when it freezes, expands. So some of that can have an impact on those contact sensors, not so much a impact on the remote sensors. And then if there's a severe storm, then we get involved in a more detailed analysis. We sometimes have to debrief council members in terms of the severity of the storm in their particular districts. Next. So here's a couple of things that I wanted to note of things that the first responders get. They do get electronic notifications. We do have code red that we use to notify public of flooding. As I mentioned, the field ops, fire and police have cameras at these low water crossings that they can use to monitor, and you can see some of the pictures. And then fire, these are dynamic things that go on of field operations, barricading roads, and then fire and police responding to 911 calls. At some of the more bigger flood locations, we do have dedicated high water rescue teams that go pre-position in case of rescues that they have to perform. Next. So you see the emails that are sent out on the right side, those two arrows going, as during the rising limb of the hydrograph, those emails are sent out to our first responders. And what we're trying to do, you see on the left side, is using that rainfall to kind of forecast ahead, give them a little bit of a legs up in terms of what could happen in the next 15 to 30 minutes. That's something we are working on right now. But that rainfall information also is broadcast to the first responders. And, we use currently we use the rainfall intensity to give them a heads up in terms of how severe the storm will be. Next. So just quickly, next steps. And I think I'm getting close to running out of time, so I'll go through this next. So what we're doing right now is looking at these low water crossings, developing what we call threshold curves. So this, the question is, what rainfall leads to an overtop? And we are modeling these with HECRAS 2D, these low water crossings, developing the threshold, looking at the cumulative rainfall. So the threshold curve is dependent on the rainfall itself. And then we monitor the cumulative rainfall as it's coming through in real time and checking whether it's below or above those threshold curves. And then if it's above, then we know it's going, it's likely to start flooding. And then as that water level starts rising, we also calibrate these threshold, the kind of the dynamic nature of the flood against the water level as it's rising and lowering. And those measurements are coming in real time. And so we are kind of doing this, working on a nowcasting system and trying to look at the rainfall reports as they're coming in, along with the water depth reports as they're coming in, to provide a 15 to 30 minute nowcasting, a look ahead forecast, so that our field ops can get that lead up information. Next. The other thing we are doing, trying to reach out to our drivers through, they do get these, if they sign up, they can get the code red notification, but we're also working on installing these electronic signs at these flood-prone intersections, so that these signages would come on whenever the road overtops, to kind of provide that visual information in addition to the flashes to help them move away from these flood-prone areas. Next. So just to summarize, what are some of the benefits of having these systems? That they provide information to first responders so that they can go and barricade the roads. Unfortunately, the drivers have this tendency, even though they might know the danger, they kind of hesitate, and then they might go through those flooded roadways. So the first responders, if the lead up information, they can use that to barricade roads. If you have systems in communication systems in place, you can reach out to the drivers. You can also educate the residents about flooded roadways so that they can plan ahead, so that some of these storms might last only 15, 30 minutes in terms of the intensities that cause flooding. So if they can just kind of delay what they planned on doing by 15 to 30 minutes, that would just keep them safe. And then the gauges also provide you a good return period analysis in terms of identifying areas that are flood prone. And then going back to that HROM effort I was talking to you about, these flood warning systems serve as an intermediate measure to provide that improved level of safety at these flood prone locations until you can construct expensive projects. And then you can use the data for nowcasting, provide some lead time. And then looking forward, the systems also can be used as navigation tools to help drivers reroute away from flooded areas. Another thing, particularly with some of the cold weather, we're also looking at putting additional road weather sensors, using that infrastructure that we already built out with our flood warning network to host additional road weather sensors. So with that, I apologize if I went just a little bit over. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Ranjan. And I'm definitely interested in seeing how the new signage that you're installing to alert the public of this, of these conditions works out. So definitely keep us up to date on that. Moving on to our next presenter, next and final presenter, James Halgren, So Dr. Halgren leads cyber infrastructure research for the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology, known as CIROH. With 20 years of experience in real-time systems integration for flood and flow prediction, he heads the CIROH Hydroinformatics Lab, guiding development of research accelerating technologies and computing facilities to support broader CIROH research goals to improve flood forecasting and water resource management. James, I will hand things over to you. Thanks.
And just quickly, let's make sure my video and audio are clear.
Looks good.
Great. Afternoon. If anybody's further west, good morning still, I think, if you're far enough west. As you mentioned, Jeremy, I work for the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology here at the University of Alabama and the Alabama Water Institute. It's a little embarrassing. I'm following Chris and Ranjan. They're getting things done at a very practical, very real level in these two cities. I used to live in Fort Collins. I interacted quite a bit with Chris when I was at the University of Colorado State University. But where I'm at now, we're hopefully doing the things that will help those kinds of systems have even better information as we look into the future and the potential for incorporating new technologies and the types of things that will make those even more effective for preventing loss of life or harm to property. Get my mouse in the right place so I can zoom ahead. The Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations in Hydrology is tightly coupled with the National Weather Service and the United States Geologic Survey. We look at problems at all scales. We look at these high intensity events. Some of these you've seen pictures of from the previous presentations. We look at issues of variability and the increasing variability that affects water supply. We're looking at water quality issues as well as massive scale issues. As you look in the bottom corner of the presentation, bottom left, the HABs issue is a matter of looking at a giant area of the United States and how it influences the biology of the Gulf. And then, of course, the human impacts is a major part of what we do, just making sure that when we're doing research, so the name of our institute is the Cooperative Institute for Research to Operations. And our goal is to make sure that when we give something that's a research product over to our operational partners, that it's something that's useful not just to them, but useful for them in their communication so that they can actually do something that has an impact for an individual that's trying to make a decision whether or not to walk in water, drive around water, etc. The idea is really cool. The classic divide is a critical thing. We sit here in I'm in a university research building, and I have an office, and I come up with really good ideas, and they all work every time in my little research watersheds, and there's this giant divide over to the real operations, you know, the places where data doesn't come in just right, hasn't been QC'd in the right ways, where there's questions that we haven't considered. And the goal is to bring together the operations and the research folks through this Cooperative Institute and see if we can't accelerate some communication that will help things out. This is me right here. I'm literally just inside of that little window right there. And we are co-located next to the Hydrologic instrumentation facility. Every USGS gauge that's being used today is going to be, this facility was just opened and they're now transitioning over here from their older space at Stennis Space Center, is going to be tested here. And if it breaks, it comes back here to be recalibrated. And then the operational component of the Office of Water Prediction at the National Water Center is housed in a building on campus here. And we're working with them to improve the prediction of flooding and water resources across the country at a high resolution. So the co-location here is hopefully accelerating those things. We take advantage of it and have meetings and talk with these guys actively. And our consortium of 28 partners, encompasses the whole country, and so hopefully we're allowing for that integration to not just help us out here at the University of Alabama, but across the whole country. And if you have anybody in any of these institutions that you know a little bit, you can ask them about CIROH and see if there's a way that you could connect and start to participate in some of the things that we're working on. We are trying, as I mentioned, to get the actionable water intelligence into the hands of people. This is a fun little mock-up of a possible web app that some people have developed. We're looking at all these different sectors. Transportation is one that I'm exploring individually in a project that I have that ended up connecting me with this webinar. With a group that are looking at road weather impacts specifically in the southern states, and then of course across the spectrum of other applications. CIROH is 3 years old almost, not quite, and we have a 5-year initial grant, and we expect to extend that to 10 years. So we're accelerating. Here are some of our current stats, and like I said, please feel free to connect with somebody in one of those institutions, and let's see if your question, your research question, could be something that we take advantage of our graduate students and other research staff to accelerate and find a way to connect it back into operations with some force multiplying by our group. Our research is divided into these 4 research themes. I'm going to take just a moment and highlight some actual things. So this is all high level so far. Let me show you some of the things that we're doing at a ground level, and then I'll finish out these slides with a couple of things that I'm working on individually that are probably hopefully directly impactful to the broad community on the line here. We have community water modeling development, which has to do with improvements to models. So somebody that has a new way to model water would be attached to our first research theme. The groups that are bringing together many different pieces to simulate large systems and bringing in the observations that are associated with those large systems and doing the data assimilation, that's our second research theme. So our direct connection to the national water model, for instance, is through this research theme 2. Hydroinformatics is all of our work to make the data and information understandable and get it out in front of people in ways that they can use. And then the last is our social science element, making sure that we're thinking ahead about how people react and making the information promote resilience rather than simply responsiveness. Our research theme 1, on the right, we've done a number of studies regarding machine learning based analysis across the continent. We've taken advantage of some of the work that's recently been done with machine learning and accelerated the capability so that we have some demonstration models with improved capacity over the whole country, and we're looking at finding ways to bring those into the operational models with explainability. That's one of the critical things people always say, but if the machine learning model can't tell me how it got its answer, how do I trust it? And we're expanding that group at the Penn State University has done some significant work advancing that. We also have a group from Stevens Institute in New Jersey that's done a lot of work with ice and the ability to model for the northern regions what will happen. How do we predict the flooding and impacts associated with ice jams and rivers and their timing of their breakup, and using pretty amazing remotely sensed information to predict and manage those situations. Research theme 2 happens to be one of my most active areas. We've developed a community infrastructure so that somebody can take the national water model and snip it out for their area and fairly quickly be running a version of it on the laptop and start to do experiments and explore what their outputs would be. A number of different additions to the framework, expanding the models that are currently in the national water model so we can explore what would be the impact if we transition to different types of models. In the hydroinformatics area, we have a number of data sets. If you go to portal.ciro.org, you can start taking a look at some of the things that have been posted so far. And as we reach our developers conference this May, that there will be a number of new things posted there as we're sharing our work with each other. And then in our science meeting in October, those things again will take another leap forward. So if you are interested, you could poke into portal.ciro.org and see some of those advances and what we're sharing there. And last of all, our social science areas, we've been and looking at the ways that these things impact beyond just the water. A number of our flood preparedness initiatives and resiliency initiatives in a number of areas, especially in the Mississippi River Basin, and the impacts that those things have on actual people when you integrate the national water model into planning, which is one of the big studies that we've been working on. Because we're a university, we do education. These are student programs across our consortium, master's and undergraduate and PhD students, and they have access to these facilities that we're co-located with, and also tours across to the different facilities that have interest with our operational partners. So the TVA in the center, in the middle there, one of our students presenting at AGU, and the flow tank, the wave tank at the USGS HIF. These are all things that our students can take advantage of in the RFCs. What do I do? My group is in charge of docs.ciro.org, where we document in a very straightforward and constantly growing way the capabilities that we're building out as a CIROH organization. Go ahead and check it out. I am part of a group that's doing flood inundation mapping work at regional scales. This is the cooperation with the University of Kansas, where they have a flood mapping dashboard right now. Today, in this very moment, there's a small amount of flooding on this river, the Lightning Creek at McCune. That same flooding is modeled in the National Water Model's flood inundation layer, which is a recently released capability from the National Weather Service. Hopefully in part 2 of this webinar, we'll get to hear more from the team that's producing that. But we are part of the research group that's looking to advance that with some of the techniques that we're developing here. As I mentioned, I work with the capability to help people get into use the National Water Model tools. We've developed what we call Next Gen in a Box. So the Next Gen National Water Model, or it's the Next Gen Water Resources Modeling Framework. We've containerized it, and we've got a workflow that if I sit with you, probably within about 5 minutes, you could be simulating the water flow in your watershed just with a few clicks. And then you could go from there to see what you want to experiment with and adjust and try some new things. That won't take 5 minutes, but I can promise we can get you started in 5 minutes. That's our commitment. So we're cooperating across a whole bunch of different agencies: the Corps of Engineers, the Ocean Service, of course, NOAA, and all of the NOAA agencies that we're part of, NIDIS for drought, and anybody else. And I clipped this in here. This is the Federal Highways link, and I hovered over it and put it into my slide deck so we could talk about all the others that we would like to connect with. So come on down and visit us in Alabama, or give us a call and roll tide.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Halgren. Yeah, and I know that we probably barely scratched the surface on all the things you guys are working on there at CIROH, but I definitely appreciate the introduction to what you guys are doing, and I'm sure that everybody else did as well. We are running a little bit behind schedule, so what I'm going to do here is if you do have any questions for any of our presenters today, go ahead and enter those using the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen, and we can enter those, or we can answer those in real time. But while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here. If you want to go to the last slide there, Matt. All right. I think you stopped sharing, Matt.
Sorry about that, everyone. Just 1 second.
No worries. In the meantime, it looks like Ranjan would like to answer the question that we have open right there. So Ranjan, if you want to unmute and answer that.
Oh, yeah, I think the question was, if I could repeat it, the impact of the National Weather Service and the staffing level and how that might impact forecast data and processes. So just from the city municipal perspective, a lot of the communication between the weather service in terms of the flood warning side takes place with the Office of Emergency Management. They do the NWS chat, and they kind of provide the lead up time. So if the impacts would be on that side of things, if there were impacts in terms of the level of service. And then I also showed you diagrams for in terms of the forecasting, what we're trying to do with forecasting. So the QPF activity, with the HER model, things like that. We are not using it right now, but again, if that level of service were to be impacted, in terms of the QPF products, that would have an impact on us. So I hope that answered the question.
Great. Thank you, Ranjan. And Dr. Halgren.
Just tagging on Ranjan's comment, we see those impacts also at the national scale. And I don't think I adequately acknowledged the contribution of the scientists at the Office of Water Prediction, the scientists at the U.S. Geological Survey, the things that they've done and their partners and contractors to get us into a place where we can do some of these cool things that, or at least I think they're cool. That they deserve a great deal of respect for the things that they've done. So and that, answering the question a little bit, just that, yeah, the impacts are real as things are being adjusted and accommodated, and it's something that's something significant to pay attention to.
Great, thank you. All right, well, it looks like we do not have any other questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us out here. If you do have any questions, you're going home tonight and you're thinking about this for some reason, after hours, you're thinking about road weather and you have a question, send me an email. I can make sure that it gets to the proper person and we can get you a good answer. Or if you just want to talk about anything road weather related, send me an email, give me a call. Let's talk through your ideas. As far as the road weather management program goes here at Federal Highway, we do quite a bit of stakeholder engagement and outreach. If you're interested in just getting the tip of the iceberg there, go ahead and register through GovDelivery for some of those notifications. Specifically, we send out a really good quarterly newsletter to the stakeholders. So if you're interested in that, follow that link. I think Marianne dropped it in the chat, and select road weather management to get those updates. And then lastly, I do want to acknowledge the National Operations Center of Excellence. They've done phenomenal work hosting us, and they have a lot of good road weather management information on their websites. When we do these webinars, they are recorded and posted there, as well as YouTube. And then they also handle outreach and marketing for upcoming webinars as well. As I mentioned early on, this is a bi-monthly schedule. So the next webinar will occur in May and will be the second part of this flood management series. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and follow the transportationops.org link that's in the chat and register for those. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just did want to mention before I do the end here, that I just dropped the link for the transportationops.org in the chat. So please feel free to click on that and check out those resources. Like Jeremy mentioned, there's lots of great resources there. So please check that out if you get a chance. And with that, I just want to say I thank everyone for today's webinar, especially our panelists, Chris, Ranjan, James, and Brandon, of course, and our moderator, Jeremy. We had a great discussion here today. And as mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on the NOCoE website. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.